If you've listened along and thought, I see myself in these conversations, then this episode is for you. Today feels a little different, not because it's heavier, but because it's meant to help us pause and look back before we move forward. It's an invitation to notice what God has been doing beneath the surface while you've been showing up, trusting, and growing, sometimes without realizing it. Today's episode is Grace for the Mom Growing Quietly, even when no one sees it. So much of growth in motherhood happens without an audience. There are no milestones for choosing patience when you're tired, praying when answers don't come, trusting God when nothing feels resolved, staying faithful when the work feels unseen. And because there's no visible marker, it's easy to assume nothing is happening. But quiet growth is still growth. We're going to go back to that scripture we talked about last week and how important it is. Luke 2:52. This is a special verse to me. It's a verse that I used to read to my son when I would read him stories at bedtime before he grew too old for that. But it's Luke 2:52, and it was in this book that we used to read all the time that had this little boy, and he was reading stories about Jesus, and it had this verse in it. And I remember reading this to him almost every night. But this verse is one that we went over and over because I think it's so important as you nurture and as your children grow to get that scripture into them, even from an early age. And Luke 2:52 tells us, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. What stands out to me is that scripture doesn't tell us how Jesus grew in every season. It simply tells us that he did. Growth was happening even when nothing dramatic was recorded. There's a lot of years in the Bible where we don't really have any recordings as far as what happened with Jesus, but we know that he was growing in his faith. So it just tells us that he did. He grew in wisdom and stature and in favor. So growth was happening even when nothing dramatic was recorded. And that reminds me that growth doesn't need a spotlight to be real. There have been seasons where I wondered if I was growing at all. I wasn't checking big boxes. I wasn't seeing immediate change. I wasn't feeling especially confident or energized.